Gonzaga is inching closer to securing a commitment from a big guard in the 2025 recruiting class, and it could happen by the end of the month.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Well, folks, we got an overview of Gonzaga's current targets in the 2025 recruiting class. We're going to talk about some of those names that you've been hearing on the show, where Gonzaga is at on the recruiting trail. We're also going to talk about Davis Fogle in that group and his new top four, where the Zags are at in that recruitment. And then we're going to close out the show talking about some former Zags playing basketball overseas, a couple updates on some of our favorite former players to round us out. We're starting with Davis Fogle because the news that came out on Wednesday, Davis Fogle, the 6'7" guard / wing from Anacortes, Washington. We've talked about him a few times on the show. He has revealed effectively a top four of programs that he is kind of zeroing in on when making his decision for where he's going to play college basketball starting the 25-26 season. The four schools: Gonzaga, Kansas, Creighton, and Nebraska. And for those of you who have listened to the show regularly, when we talked about Mike Sheriff-Johnson a few days ago, and we've talked about this a few other times, one of these things is not like the other. And when you see that, whether it's geographic, like whether it's just geography, whether it's like the level of the program, whether it's just a program that stands out from the rest of the schools on the list, that usually means something. It doesn't automatically mean a commitment. Isaiah Harwell, who we'll talk about later in the show, when he revealed his top 9 a long time ago, so I think back in January or something like that, Idaho State was on the list because his father, Ron Harwell, played at Idaho State and was fantastic there. And he's from Pocatello, Idaho, not far from campus. Isaiah Harwell is not going to go to Idaho State. We'll get that out of the way now. I don't know if he's coming to Gonzaga. We'll talk about that in the second segment. He's been rumored as a Zag for a long time, but he's not going to Idaho State. It was a nice gesture to have them on his top 9, and I do believe he toured the campus, and I think he gave them a look, but he is too talented of a player to go to Idaho State. It's no disrespect to the program. It's just a fact. So sometimes when you see a name on there, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going there, but it always means something. And in this case, we're looking at 3 programs that are distinctly in the Midwest of the country: Creighton, Nebraska, and Kansas, all in the same area, and then Gonzaga being your outlier. Other things we know about Davis Fogle: he's from Washington. He's from Anacortes, a small, very small town up near Bellingham, the port out to the San Juan Islands. For anybody who's never been to the San Juan Islands, highly recommend. Beautiful out there. Beautiful, beautiful area. But that is where Davis Fogle is from. He is planning to play his next high school season at Compass Prep in Arizona, which is a high-level kind of recruiting hotbed high school. And again, still out here on the West Coast in Arizona, not playing at a school out in the Midwest. So it usually means something. In this case, Gonzaga represents an opportunity for him to stay closer to home, closer to his family, closer to his friends. We know that he has been interested in the Gonzaga program historically. We've heard that he has gone to camps at Gonzaga when he was in middle school and a younger player, and has expressed interest in potentially playing at this program even before he had received an official offer from Gonzaga. Right now, Fogle is the 67th ranked player in the class of 2025. He's a 4-star talent. That's using On3's composite rankings. The individual rankings for the 4 major recruiting services: he is 62nd in the class at Rivals. He is 74th at both ESPN and 24/7 Sports, and he is 84th at On3. He's a little bit of a polarizing prospect, in part because he played at a low level of competition at Anacortes. He played 2A state basketball there, so we haven't seen a lot of him against higher level competition. He also grew significantly. I think he was 6'4", maybe 6'5" when he was kind of first on Gonzaga's radar. He's now listed at 6'7". So you hit a growth spurt. You now become a little bit more versatile in terms of what position you can play. You're starting to get a little bit more attention. I know St. Mary's was in on him a little bit earlier, Seattle U, Washington, other local programs had been invested. Now he's looking at a top 4 that includes a Big 12 team, a Big East team, a Big 10 team, and Gonzaga, a premier non-high major program, of course. And you're kind of starting to see why he's started to creep up those lists as he's gotten taller, as he's kind of filled out his body a little bit. And he'll get an opportunity to really showcase what he's capable of doing when he plays high school ball at Compass Prep next year. Now, he's been on the summer circuit. He played at the Pangos All-American Camp this past weekend. I recently had a conversation with Tobias Bass of The Athletic on the Locked On College Basketball podcast. Didn't speak about Davis Fogle on that show, but talked to him about him off air. He likes a lot of elements of his game. He thinks there's some areas that he could grow, but certainly sees why Mark Few in particular would be interested in him and his services, because he knows what Mark Few is capable of, kind of what the development system looks like at Gonzaga and the kind of the trajectory that Davis could take were he to come to campus. And it sounds like Gonzaga's pretty darn interested in the same thing. He's going to be on campus Hoop Fest weekend. This is a known fact. He has scheduled his visit for June 28th, 29th. He will be here for the best basketball weekend in America. In Spokane, Hoop Fest is going to be an absolute blast. Gonzaga doesn't bring players to Hoop Fest weekend unless they're really trying to close the deal. They don't want Davis Fogle leaving Spokane without a commitment in late June for a lot of reasons. One, anytime you bring a player to campus, you want them leaving committing. That's just part of the deal. You want them to leave with some kind of indication that they're planning to come back, they're planning to be here. Mark Few is also really trying to get his offseason as complete as possible before he heads to Paris to help be an assistant coach for Team USA. That doesn't mean that if Davis doesn't commit by June, he's going to say, okay, well, see ya, and not continue to pursue him. Davis himself has indicated to Jamie Shaw of On3 that he's planning to commit before the early signing period sometime in the fall. So I still don't necessarily think it's guaranteed we'll get a commitment from him after that June visit, but certainly that's the goal for Gonzaga on that visit. On3 has dramatically increased Gonzaga's odds of landing Davis Fogle. I don't put a ton of stock into those numbers. Nik Khamenia has remained 78% likely to go to Gonzaga for like over a year. Maybe Nik Khamenia will come to Gonzaga. We'll talk about him in the second segment as well, but it feels like those numbers are still really high for a player who has not indicated a lot about Gonzaga in the last 6 months or so, has been more heavily pursued by UCLA and other programs in that time as well. But right now, On3 has Davis Fogle's 75.7% chance of landing at Gonzaga. Next up is 18.2% for Nebraska. They were one of the first high major programs to really show a lot of investment in him earlier. Fogle, if he were to commit to Gonzaga, we'll certainly talk about that if it happens. He would be in that guard room in 25-26 alongside Braden Smith, alongside Emmanuel Inocente, the Tarleton State transfer, alongside Dusty Stromer, potentially alongside Steele Venters. We spoke about him on Wednesday's show. He does have an additional year of eligibility after this upcoming season if he wants to use it. No indication one way or another if he's planning to or not, but he could be in the mix alongside those other guys. Braden Huff should be back. Jun-Suk Yo could potentially be back as well. Looking ahead, Graham Ike could be back as well. That's certainly a conversation we'll have as we get into the season and kind of get a sense of what we think Graham is going to do. But that's kind of the mix right now for where Davis Fogle is at, one of the premier players that Gonzaga has been targeting in this 2025 class, but not by any stretch the only player that Gonzaga is pursuing in 2025. And in fact, I want to talk more about those other guys. I want to talk about Isaiah Harwell, where we're at with him, where we're at with Nik Khamenia, Jalen Haralson, a huge name in the 2025 class who Gonzaga has been pursuing, who is indicating he may come on a visit. We're going to cover all of that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, Gametime. Folks, the Hillsboro Hops starting their baseball season here very shortly, 10 minutes away from my house, and I love having the opportunity to see them and many other minor league baseball teams just a short distance away, and that is why I love using Gametime, because I like having the luxury to make last-minute decisions to head to the ballpark, and Gametime is the perfect place to get those last-minute tickets because prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, GameWork takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And if you're somebody who's concerned you're going to buy tickets from a third party, from an app on your phone, you're going to show up to the ballpark and they're going to turn you away because your ticket is not real. One of the great things about Gametime is they have the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry. Personally, I love the peace of mind I have when using Gametime. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Folks, 2 tickets, Hillsborough Hops, front row, it's like $30. You can get them for $10 using code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off that first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still any patents, still Locked On Zags podcast, and it's still a recruiting episode here of the Locked On Zags podcast. We talked Davis Fogle in the first segment. He's indicated that he is choosing between 4 schools, 3 way out in the Midwest in Kansas, Nebraska, and Creighton, and then 1 right out here in the Pacific Northwest at Gonzaga. Talked about what that might mean for him, but Fogle is a relatively late addition to Gonzaga's crop of recruits that they are pursuing in the 2025 class. He is one of 4 players that has received an offer from Gonzaga that has not committed elsewhere. They made offers to other players who have since committed to different programs, but there are 4 current offers on the table from Mark Few and the staff for players in the 2025 class. There's also another player who we'll talk about at the end here who Gonzaga has contacted. They have not formally made him an offer. We'll see if that changes. Fogle, of course, we already talked about him. We'll move on to the other ones, starting with Isaiah Harwell. Isaiah Harwell is the 7th ranked player in the 2025 recruiting class, according to 24/7 Sports. He's a 6'6" combo guard from Pocatello, Idaho. Like I said, his top 9, it had Gonzaga, it had Idaho State, it had Cal, and then it had a lot of premier programs. North Carolina was on there. I believe Alabama was on there. It was some big name schools because he's a top 10 recruit in his class. He's a combo guard. He's a fluid athlete, exceptional with the basketball in his hands, long, rangy, projects to be a good defensive player. He's playing at Wasatch Academy in Mount Pleasant, Utah, the same high school that Nolan Hickman played his final year of high school basketball at. We've seen Harwell and Hickman communicate with each other on social media before. When Harwell came to the game, he was originally planning to come to Gonzaga's game against St. Mary's, which they lost in Spokane. Unfortunately, he suffered an injury while playing, an injury that I don't have a firm update on where he's at right now, but it has prevented him from being able to participate in a lot of these summer showcases. But it kept him from coming to campus on February 3rd. He showed up 2 weeks later on February 24th when Gonzaga took on Santa Clara, picked up a victory in that game. Nolan Hickman had a monster game. Isaiah Harwell was cheering him on the stands, was talking about him on social media. It certainly doesn't hurt to have a connection like that in the program. For Harwell right now, I think the fact that he's going through an injury recovery, he's focused on that. We haven't heard a ton of updates regarding his recruitment. On3 still favors Gonzaga for whatever that is worth at this point. It certainly feels like Gonzaga has been in early and in often in their aggressive pursuit of Isaiah Harwell. He has also indicated an affinity for North Carolina in the past, so certainly they're going to be a mix. There's going to be other programs that get and stay in the mix here with Harwell, but he feels like Gonzaga's really top option. I think Jalen Haralson is ranked very similarly to him, but Haralson doesn't have as many connections to Gonzaga and doesn't seem quite as likely to end up on campus. So I think Harwell's kind of the big prize. And Gonzaga will certainly take both Fogle and Harwell. I don't think that they're feeling like they can only get one or the other. They have room for more scholarships next year. Certainly they already have a couple guards in Braden Smith and Inocente and Dusty Stromer, but Stromer can play the 3 and Inocente could play the 3. And depending what happens with Steele Venters, they still have room to fill all of those spots. So I don't think they're limited to just one of these top 25 guards in the 25 class. I think they can handle multiple of them. But they're also looking at a forward. That forward would be Nik Khamenia. We have talked about him a whole bunch of times in the last 2 years in the Locked On Zags podcast. He initially visited as an unofficial visit for Craziness in the Kennel, not in 2023, Craziness in the Kennel in 2022. He took an unofficial visit at that time. He then took an official visit to Gonzaga the next year at Craziness in the Kennel in 2023. He's been on campus twice. He's been a target for Gonzaga since he was a borderline, I think like a top 90 prospect, 3-star kid in the 2025 class. Now he is 38th in the class. Some places have him inside the top 30. He has played extremely well at Harvard Westlake High School. He has played extremely well on the summer circuit, EYBL, Pangos, all all of those places, Nik Khamenia has really shined. He's 6'8". He can play the 3-4 hybrid. He's fits that kind of Ben Gregg-ish role that Gonzaga has had a lot of success with. He's not quite as big as Ben. He's maybe more of a Corey Kispert type, but he's a very talented player. We know UCLA is making a big push. I believe USC has been making a big push. It feels like Gonzaga has lost momentum, but it also doesn't really seem like other programs have gained a ton of momentum. So I don't think that this is like something that's gone for Gonzaga, that Khamenia hasn't committed yet, therefore he's not coming to Gonzaga. I'm not going to say that it's good news that he hasn't committed yet, but he's still, like, a lot of 25s haven't committed yet. Gonzaga just was talking to him 3 years ago, so it feels like this has been taking a really long time, but he's kind of right on track with a lot of top 20, 25 prospects. So I'm not super concerned about that. I will say it would be really nice to have Nik Khamenia commit to the program. It'd be really nice to have him in the mix for that 25 team, especially with Ben Gregg gone, with Michael Ayayi gone. It would be nice to have him. I don't know that he's playing huge minutes right away as a freshman, but he'd be in the rotation unquestionably with Braden Huff. It depends what happens with Graham Ike in that situation, but certainly a player to keep an eye on. And then I mentioned Jalen Haralson. I'll mention him again here. Number 11 ranked player in that class at 24/7, so just 4 spots behind Isaiah Harwell. He's a 6'6" wing from LaPorte, Indiana. If you notice a theme, Gonzaga's guards that they've been recruiting lately, they're big guards. They're not recruiting a lot of 6'1" guards, 6'2" guards, even 6'3" guards. Davis Fogle started 6'5". He's 6'7" now. Harwell's 6'6". Haralson's 6'6". The players that Gonzaga is pursuing for guard spots are bigger guards. That does not feel unintentional to me. I think that is a specific desire for Mark Few and the staff to have some big-bodied guards in this program going forward. Haralson, again, he's from LaPorte, Indiana, and his connections run very deep in his state. Can't blame him. Indiana's a pretty fantastic basketball state. The University of Indiana, the Hoosiers, Notre Dame, and Purdue are all 3 programs that are heavily in the mix here, all, of course, in the state of Indiana. Auburn is another program that stands out, and again, kind of a similar thing. Haralson mostly gets connected to the 3 schools in Indiana and Auburn. That probably means something, in the same way that Fogle's connection to Gonzaga is different than the connection he has with the Midwest schools. Haralson has visited Auburn. Them and Indiana are kind of considered the front runners right now. He has also visited Indiana. He has indicated that he does want to visit Gonzaga. And that's the main reason I'm even talking about him here, because there hasn't been a ton of momentum of Jalen Haralson to Gonzaga. It hasn't really ever been considered a particularly likely destination. But he did say he wants to visit. And things change when you visit. The momentum can swing in a different way. I would still expect for Gonzaga that Harwell and Khamenia are the far more likely targets, or are the far more likely players to end up in Spokane, whether it's one or both of them. I would think both are more likely, and Fogle the most likely at this point, to be players for Gonzaga than Jalen Haralson. But he might be the best of the group. I know Harwell's ranked a little bit higher than him right now. Harwell's also has a significant injury right now. That certainly plays a role. Haralson is a fantastic player. He can play the 2, he can play the 3. He's a high-level scorer, 3-level scorer, multidimensional player, long, rangy, athletic, all the things you want in a big-bodied guard like that. There's a reason that so many high-profile programs are interested in him. But I wouldn't be holding my breath for him to end up in Spokane. But if he at least visits, then I think the Zags, just like anybody, you get a chance. Somebody comes to your campus, you get a chance. And that's all that Gonzaga really wants at this point right now. And then last but not least, the player that Gonzaga has not offered but is pursuing in the 2025 class, that's Julius Halafinoua, 6'11" big man from Australia. Georgetown, Marquette, Gonzaga are the 3 programs that have known to be shown some interest here in Julius. There's just not a ton known on him. He's an international player. There's not a ton of stats, not a ton of data that can be found. There's a video of him talking about being pursued by Marquette, Georgetown, and Gonzaga. He talks about his game. He mentions that he's kind of a pass-first big. He likes to be a connector, a facilitator. I think that really works in Gonzaga's offense. You watch tape of Drew Timme and what he did at the end of his career, where he was kind of facilitating the offense at the top of the key. You watch tape of Domantas Sabonis in the NBA, who's extraordinary at that, and he didn't pick up all those skills at Gonzaga, to be honest, but I still think you use that as a sales pitch of, hey, look, here's an international kid who came to Gonzaga. Look what happened to them. Certainly there's an opportunity here for Gonzaga to pursue Halafinoua. And I don't know if the lack of a scholarship offer is on Gonzaga's side, what the situation might be there. But certainly if we're talking about names in that class to at least keep an eye on, definitely have one on Halafinoua, because he could be a really fun player in this system if he did decide to take his talents to Spokane. All right, folks, we're going to move on, talk about some former Zags, including Joel Ayayi, who has a new home in France with a new team. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a pair of former G League Ignite players who were also former Zags. They both have new places to play as well. And we're going to get into that in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Eddie Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from talking about recruiting targets for Mark Few and the Zags in the 2025 class. I want to talk some former Zags as well. So I'm going to try to do a handful of times over the offseason. I used to try to run through all the players who are playing professionally. The list has just gotten way too long. There's like 40 former Zags. But almost every player you can think of who was a Gonzaga scholarship player in the last 10 years, well, most of them are still playing. Not all, but most are still playing somewhere. They're playing in Mexico. They're playing in Europe. They're playing in China. They're literally all over the place. It's incredible. It's an incredible thing. So I want to try to pick and choose a few whenever there's new updates on former Zags, guys who were fan favorites or beloved in the program. I want to try to talk about what they're up to, where they're at now, as we kind of get a chance to explore some of these former Zags. We'll start with Joel Ayayi. He signed with a new team in France, JL Bourg Basket. He was previously with Nanterre 92. And in fact, last year, Nanterre played JL Bourg in the playoffs of the top French league and lost in a 3-game series. So Joel, the old adage, if you can't beat him, join him. He decides to sign with that team for the next season. Joel was great last year for Nanterre. He played in 37 games for them, averaged 8.5 points, 5.2 boards, 3 assists, 1.1 steals, was incredibly efficient, 56% on 2-pointers, 37% from 3, didn't deliver great at the free throw line, about 68%. But if you're looking at these stats, 9 points, 5 boards, 4 assists, decent amount of steals, highly efficient scorer. Yeah, that's Joel Ayayi to a T, man. He has not changed at all, nor should he. Fantastic basketball player, do-it-all, versatile guard. Love seeing him have that success in his home country. He had a really masterful game at one point last season, 26 points, 8 boards, and 7 assists on 11 of 15 shooting. He leaves Nanterre to go to JL Bourg, team, the top team in the French league last year. Currently the home to Zachary Rissache, the projected potential number 1 pick in the 2025 NBA draft. It's him or Alex Sarr from Australia. Rissache could easily be a top 3, top 4 pick in this draft, almost certainly will be, and he's playing right now with that team. There's a mailbag question I got earlier this week about the French development leagues and how they are kind of better was the question than the USA development, and why we're seeing so many French prospects and at the top of drafts like Wembanyama and Rissache and others. And it's just a really good basketball country. It has been for a long time. Tony Parker came from there. Like it's not like this is brand new, but Joel getting to get back into that mix and play at that level, play with those talented players and be a contributor just shows how talented he is. And the fact that he didn't make the NBA, I understand why. He's a 6'4" off guard. We've talked about that with Rasir Bolton, with Malachi Smith. We'll end up having this conversation with Nolan Hickman, probably, unfortunately, is if you're not a point guard and you're under 6'6", your chances of sticking in the NBA just very slim. And that's kind of what cost Joel. He did get a chance, 7 games with the Washington Wizards in the 21-22 season. He spent all of the 22-23 season bouncing around the G League, played with the Hawks affiliate, the Lakeland Magic, Orlando's affiliate. I think he played with Washington's affiliate, the Capital City Go-Go's. And then this last year, he was, like we said, in France and has kind of settled into that being his professional career. He was an alternate for France's FIBA World Cup roster, but he did not make their 19-man roster that they're taking with them to Paris this year. Would have been incredibly cool to see Joel represent France at the Olympics in Paris, like we got to see Rui represent his country, Japan, at the Olympics in Tokyo. Unfortunately, that didn't go very well for Rui, and it actually cost him some mental health issues. So I guess we're happy that that's not going to happen for Joel, but would have liked to see him get that opportunity to represent his home country. Speaking of France, Admon Gilder has signed with a team Pau Orthez in the French second league. So not quite the same level that Nanterre and the teams that JL Bourg, the team that Joel just signed with. But Admon's had a fascinating career. Since leaving Gonzaga, which was not that long ago, he has played professionally in Finland, Poland, Israel, Canada, and the G League Ignite. Now he's playing in France. He's only played 3 games with the new team, so just getting acclimated. But wanted to talk about his time with the G League Ignite. Of course, the G League Ignite no longer exists. They shut down after this year. It was an experiment that just didn't really work. The NIL era happened right after the G League Ignite started. It was kind of started with the intention of taking some of the top prospects who didn't want to deal with college basketball, who didn't want to play at that level, who didn't want to go to school, and who wanted to start playing professionally, make money, play in the G League, play against top-tier competition, and then hopefully boost your draft stock. It didn't work. It didn't work for a lot of reasons. One, you take a whole bunch of players who want to boost their draft stock and put them all on the same team. It doesn't really work. Team's not going to be very good. And that was the problem with this team last year. They were very bad last year. I think they went like 5-37 or so, some crazy bad statistic in terms of wins and losses. They added some veteran guys to fill out the roster, like Admon, Gilder, like David Stockton, who we'll talk about in a second. Jeremy Pargo was with them for a couple of games, but it just didn't work. But Gilder played well for them in a small role. Played 41 games for them last year, averaged about 6 points, 3.5 boards, 1.3 assists, parlays that into a signing with the team in France. Hopefully continued success for Gilder in his professional career. And like I said, we're going to close it out talking about David Stockton. Stockton is playing right now in Puerto Rico with Arecibo is the name of the team. 24 games with them, 31 minutes per game. The team is 19-5. So David is really helping impact winning. And I can tell you that because his numbers are phenomenal. 19.6 points a game, 6 assists per game, 3.3 rebounds. He's shooting 45% from three. David Stockton lighting it up right now for Arecibo in the Puerto Rican League. Like I said, he also played in the G League Ignite last year. Only played 3 games, so it doesn't. They went 0-3, but again, they lost almost all the games that they played. But the main thing I wanted to focus on with David, I'm happy he's got a professional job right now. He's playing in Puerto Rico. He's putting up big numbers. That's great. I would like to see him get back to the G League. Because for starters, he's had a long and lengthy, successful career playing in the G League. It has not led to very many NBA opportunities. He's had a few games with Utah, a few games with Sacramento. That's it. But David right now is 4th all-time in assists in G League history. He has 1,542 career assists in the G League. That is 4th behind Curtis Stinson, Josh Maggette, and Will Conroy. He's 490 assists behind first place. So the odds of him getting there, he'd probably have to play 2 full seasons in the G League, put up big numbers. He's averaged like 9 assists per game in the G League before. So he plays 40 games at 9 assists. You're close to getting to 490, but you're not quite there. So I want to see him do that for a simple reason. His dad, John Stockton, is the all-time leader in assists in the NBA. And Courtney Vandersloot, also from Gonzaga, is going to be the all-time WNBA assist leader. She's not there yet. She's been chasing Sue Bird, but Sue Bird is retired. Courtney basically needs to play 2 or 3 more healthy seasons, and she will get there. If there is a reality where John Stockton is the all-time NBA assist leader, Courtney Vandersloot is the all-time WNBA assist leader, and David Stockton is the all-time G League assist leader, I don't know that it means anything. They're not going to be throwing up a bunch of banners. It's not going to change the Gonzaga's recruiting or anything like that. It's just a weird, wonky, potentially amazing fun fact about Gonzaga. And the fact of the matter is they're probably going to get there with an NBA and the WNBA, and that's where people care about more. The fact that the G League could also get there, and it would be, again, a family member, of course, with David and John Stockton, would be fun. It would be fun. When Courtney passes Sue Bird, I'm going to be all over that. Assist University. Gonzaga is the all-time leader in assists in both the 2 major basketball organizations in the United States. That would be incredible. I hope David gets a chance to get back to the G League and potentially chip away at that record, because if he's got that record as well, that's just a phenomenal stat that I think is going to blow people's minds when you say it to him at trivia night or something like that. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for hanging out with us here in June in the off season. Love having these everyday listeners still talking Zags hoops 24/7. If you are one of those people and you're like, man, I love getting to keep chatting Gonzaga basketball, come join us on the Discord channel. It's free. There's a link in the show notes, whether it's audio or video platform. Come hang out. We're talking Zags hoops. We're sending links. We're talking rumors, all sorts of good stuff on that Discord channel. I'll be back on Friday with more Zag stuff. Again, we'll get more into the NBA draft stuff with Anton Watson. We'll continue the season in review series, talk about that final scholarship spot, all that stuff coming your way in future episodes of Locked On Zags. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, as always, go Zags.